right, so we're going to start our unit on learning today. It's going to take us about a week to get through this, maybe a little bit longer. So we need to be ready for that test pretty soon. Anyway, let's get on with this, right? So what is learning? Well, it's the changes we make in our behavior because we experience something, right? This will be 7 to 9% of the AP test. What does that mean? You'll have 7 or up to 9 multiple choice questions. You'll have 70 minutes to answer 100 questions. So 9 of them, up to 9 of them, could be on learning. So again, like I said, this is the long-lasting change in our behavior because of the experiences we have, right? Um, whether they're in the classroom or out there in real life, right? Um, So this has to be a lasting change, right? This is the key thing. It has to be a lasting change, and we have to remember it is not a simple reflexive action that we do, right? Reflexes, we're born with those. That doesn't mean we learn them, right? So please make sure we remember that. Also, you have to remember that learning is a lot harder. Um, learning about learning is a lot more difficult than just learning by watching or by studying. So we need to keep that in mind as well. And of course, because we have the most advanced brains on the planet, learning plays a larger role in our shaping our behavior than our instincts do. Yes, instincts keep us out of trouble, help us out every now and then, but uh, learning will give us the upper hand over our instincts any old day. All right. So, guys, we don't have to come to school to learn anything. Most of you learn by watching, whether you're watching your parents, your big brother, older sister, uh, TV, the movies, right? We call that observational learning, and that's probably the type of learning that we do the most. We learn by watching, right? So we will talk more about that as we go, right? But if you're going through life and you're not learning anything, I imagine your life is going to be full of chaos, and we want to avoid that, don't we? Um, so, like I said, learning has a greater effect on us than our instincts do. Um, it's something that we picked up evolutionarily, right, as our brains were developing. We developed the frontal lobe and then the cortex on top of that. Yes, instincts do come in handy. Yes, I'm not going to deny that. But learning has a greater effect on our behavior than anything else. Habituation. What is habituation? It means you get used to something, right? You can be in class. If you hear the bell ring, what are you going to do? Well, depends, right? If you're in first, third, fourth, and fifth, you hear the bell, odds are you're going to stand up and walk out the door. Why? Because you're used to the bell telling you it's time to go to another class. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out there could be some trouble if you hear sirens racing past your house either, right? Um, any stuff like that, right? That we are exposed to constantly. We will call this really habituation, which is a really, really simple kind of learning. Then we have the mere exposure effect. Um, so most of the time, you guys aren't aware of this, but you can have your choice at the next restaurant you go to influenced subconsciously, right? You could be watching TV and the last thing you see is a burger commercial. So next thing you know, you're at Texas Roadhouse and you order a burger. You don't know why. Well, that was the mere exposure effect. You were exposed to it recently, and that is what you're going to pick. For example, I think I've already talked about the Coke challenge and the Pepsi challenge when we were doing the single blind and the double blind studies, right? Um, so you're going to prefer whichever one you were most recently exposed to. That's the trick about the Coke or the Pepsi challenge, right? So that's the mere exposure effect. Now, if you've heard of something and you haven't actually tasted it or experienced it, you're still more likely to pick it because you've heard of it. If you've never heard of it and nobody's told you anything about it, so you're more likely to be more reticent and refuse to try something new. Now, complex learning, behavioral learning, there are two types. There's classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Believe it or not, guys, this is we do this to you in school. Right. We're going to talk about the classical conditioning first, and then we'll talk about operant conditioning. But like it says here, right, classical conditioning is going to be a lot easier to learn than operant conditioning. Why? Because classical conditioning, guys, we're taking advantage of a natural reaction that we already have, depending on what the stimulus is, right? Versus operant conditioning, which we're trying to shape your behavior. Think of it as you're training your dog, right? To go outside to use the bathroom. It's not going to be a simple thing that takes you one day. It's going to take you, it's going to take you maybe a week or two, maybe longer, depending on the dog, to go potty outside. So let's start with classical conditioning. So I hope you guys are familiar with Ivan Pavlov. If you're not, please learn this guy. He was the one that came up with the experiment that led us to discover this process of classical conditioning. And as you can tell by the picture here, it does involve a dog. So, what exactly was happening during his little study? um, I think he was trying to study. He discovered this accidentally. He wasn't trying to learn about how dogs learn and react to things. I think he was studying their intestinal tract or something like that because I think he was more veterinarian. The thing he was doing was for a veterinarian and not for a psychologist. But here is what happened, right? So, what happens anytime a dog is around food? He starts to drool. That reaction, guys, we're going to call the unconditioned response. Why? Because nobody had to teach the dog to drool when he's around food. Think about it this way, guys, right? If we're in class and I walk in with a tray of, say, 200 wings, all the different kinds of flavors, what's going to happen to you? I bet your mouth is going to start watering once the smell hits your nose. No, we're not dogs, but we have a similar physiological reaction. That is the unconditioned response. Nobody had to teach you to start drooling when you're around food. So, why do we drool when we're around food? Because we need drool to taste. If we were totally dehydrated, we cannot salivate, we would be unable to taste our food. And of course, we love to taste food, right? So, in this case, right, we have the drool being the unconditioned response. But the food itself is the unconditioned stimulus. Nobody had to sit down and give this dog a class on what is food and what is not. He's going to know, right? So that's the unconditioned stimulus, and the drool is the unconditioned response. So what was happening during this experiment is, I was going to say Freud, Pavlov would ring a bell and well, you can see it was a tuning fork, right? It wasn't a bell, but we're going to call it a bell. He would ring the bell at the same time that he was, uh, before he was going to feed the dogs. Now, to the dogs, that the sound that the tuning fork makes means absolutely nothing. So, right, the the tuning fork would be the neutral stimulus because it doesn't mean anything to the dog yet. And because he heard this bell, nothing happened with the dog. He didn't drool. He didn't do nothing. He didn't react. Why? Because the bell meant nothing to the dog. But soon after, right, they would ring the tuning fork, and then soon after they would bring in the food, and they would do this day after day. The dog learned that the bell meant food was on the way. So it was no longer the neutral stimulus. Once the dog started to drool at the sound of the tuning fork, it became the conditioned stimulus, right? And the dog drooling at the sound of the tuning fork, okay, is the conditioned response to that stimulus, right? So the tuning fork was an unconditioned stimulus, but once you rang it enough times before the dog ate, it became the conditioned stimulus. Why? Because the dog would start to drool, which was the the unconditioned response, but it's now the conditioned response. Why? Because the dog is drooling at the sound of the bell and not the food itself. So again, what I'm sorry about my voice, guys. Some reason I think I'm might be having might be losing my voice. I hope not, but we'll see. Sorry about that again. Anyway, so as we can see here, um, Pavlov was just taking advantage of the dog's natural reaction to food, which was salivating, right? That's the unconditioned response again, and the food itself is the conditioned response. When he was feeding the dogs, he would ring a bell, the little tuning fork. He would ring it, and then soon he would present the food. What happened was the dogs associated the ringing of the bell, which was a neutral stimulus again because they didn't react to it at all, um, and then over time, not that long, it became the conditioned stimulus because they started salivating at the sound of the bell. And the drooling, which was the unconditioned response, became the conditioned response because they would start to drool at the sound of the bell. And really, there is no reason why a bell should cause a dog to start to drool. All right. So remember, there's five things that we need in order for there to be classical conditioning. And by the way, I'm going to be doing something in class tomorrow to you and see if we can classically condition ourselves there on something, right? All right. So these are the five things you need, guys. The neutral stimulus. In this case, it was the bell that they were ringing, right? The unconditioned stimulus, which was the food, the natural reaction to the food was the unconditioned response, which was the drooling. Soon, the bell went from neutral stimulus to the conditioned stimulus because the dogs would react to the bell by starting to drool, and the drool then became the conditioned response because really, there's no reason why dogs should start to drool when you ring a bell. All right, so um, you're going to need to find a neutral stimulus, guys. If you're trying to do this with your little brother, little sister, or whatever, you need to find something that they normally don't react to. Maybe you turn on a light or you turn it off or you ring the bell, right? Uh, if they don't react to it initially, you know you have a neutral stimulus because it doesn't mean anything to them, right? But besides the neutral stimulus, you also need to present the unconditioned stimulus, something that's going to cause them to react. I don't know if it's going to be a video game, a Taylor Swift video. You know your brothers and sisters, right? You need something that they're going to respond to. That's going to be the unconditioned stimulus, and of course, you're trying to get that unconditioned response from them, whether right? You're just trying to get some peace and quiet for yourself. And whenever you present this, you want your brother or sister to be quiet and watch TV, right? Well, you need to find something that they're quiet and watch carefully to begin with, right? That's the unconditioned response. And then we have to make it go from unconditioned to a conditioned, right? So I don't know. It depends, right? Depends on the person, depends on the animal you're working with, right? The acquisition is going to be the phase where the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus to get that conditioned response that we're looking for, right? So the period of time that it takes you to react to get the results that you are looking for, we're going to call that the acquisition stage. And you're going to want them to react to whatever it is that you're presenting, right? Whether it's a bell or you're flicking a light on and off, that's going to become the conditioned stimulus, just like the bell became the conditioned stimulus for the dog. And you're going to want your brother or sister to react by sitting down and watching TV quietly as they do for whatever their favorite show is, right? You want that to become their conditioned response every time you ring a bell or turn the lights on and off, right? So, um, we do know that this works. Why? How do we know this? Because we do this to you guys in school. Yes, we do. And we also do operant conditioning, but we'll talk about operant conditioning later. Now, uh, what happens over time if you're not presented that that conditioned stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus to go? What happens over time? Well, you stop reacting, right? You stop reacting the way you did before. For example, if these dogs are being fed by another person who has a bell for God knows what reason they might have a bell for, right? But if they ring the bell and they go off to do something and not feed the dogs, well, eventually the dogs are not going to pay attention to the bell because, again, the bell naturally doesn't mean anything to them, and they will stop drooling in response to the bell. And we call that extinction, right? When they stop reacting to the unconditioned stimulus, we call that extinction, right? So again, you can see what extinction is. Now, spontaneous recovery. You might go a year or two without reacting to whatever it is that you're conditioned to. As like, when you're in school and you're conditioned to the sound of a ding to get up and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, you're going to be out of school sooner or later, and you're not going to be required to say the Pledge of Allegiance to start the day anymore. So you might hear a ding one day. You're at Target, Walmart, and you're not going to get the urge to stop and say the Pledge of Allegiance. But say it happens. You hear a ding, you stop what you're doing, and next thing you know, you got your hand over your heart and you're saying the pledge, but there's no flag around, there's no school around, and oh, what am I doing? Why did I do that? This is what we call spontaneous spontaneous recovery, guys. So again, spontaneous recovery is just when we react to the conditioned stimulus. Sorry about that. We're going to react to the conditioned stimulus after we experienced extinction. That's called spontaneous recovery. Now, timing matters in all this, guys. Timing does matter. There are four different ways we could classically condition you. The first one is delayed conditioning. What does this mean? Well, first you present the conditioned stimulus, which is the bell, right? While the conditioned stimulus is still there, that's when you present the unconditioned stimulus, uh, right? In this case, food or whatever, right? Then there's trace conditioning. You present the conditioned stimulus, you ring the bell, you take a minute or two break, and then you present the food. That's trace conditioning. All right. Then simultaneous conditioning, you ring the bell and bring the food at the same time. And then backward conditioning, you bring in the food, and while they're eating, you ring the bell, right? So you could do this in four different ways in order to try to classically condition someone. All right. So then we have first and second order conditioning. First order is just what we're talking about right now, right? You ring the bell, you present the food, you make the dog happy. Then you go to ringing the bell, and the dog should start to drool as a result of that, right? Now, second order conditioning is different because you present two unconditioned stimulus first, right? You might flash a green light at them, then ring a bell, then present the food and get them to drool, right? Uh, and actually, wait a minute. I'm sorry, guys. Uh, you have to do the first order conditioning. Then, they're going to react to the bell, right? So you're going to flash that green light and then ring the bell and wait for them to drool. You're going to do this a few times, and then you're going to try to get them to drool at the sight of the green light itself, not the bell. So then they went from drooling at the sight of food to drooling at the sound of a bell, and then they're going to go to drooling at the sight of green light. All right, moving on. Uh, I'm going to tell you guys, we do this to you in school, right? But baby Albert here, this is a story that needs to be heard. Baby Albert here belonged to one of the nurses that worked in this particular hospital where John Watson was trying to condition this baby. So baby Albert, like all babies, he loved small furry things like plush toys and stuff like that, puppies, kitties, all that, right? But also rats because they're also small and fluffy, right? So if it was small and fluffy, he would like to pet it. But that's not what they were trying to do, right? So what they were trying to do is they were trying to get the kid to be afraid of those things. So what they would do is they would present the small furry object or animal, and while baby Albert was reaching over to grab it and pet it and hug it and squeeze it or whatever, they would ring this gong behind baby Albert and scare the hell out of him, right? They did this so many times, baby Albert learned to be afraid of these things that he loved at first. Just seeing them brought terror to him because he thought he was in for a scare. Right now, we call this aversive conditioning. And guys, we would not do this today to baby Albert. This is very unethical. Remember, do no harm. This was obviously harming baby Albert. But the greater tragedy of baby Albert, what is it, guys? Well, he died very young. Now, he died at the hospital that his mom was working. I don't think it was as a result of this, but if it was, I don't know if I could live with myself if I was the mother. All right, but we'll watch this little video tomorrow in class. Now, last thing for today, generalization, right? You hear a bell, not like the bell that you were conditioned on, but it's very similar. It might get you to react the same way. We call this generalization. It's just so similar to your conditioned stimulus that they're going to get the conditioned response anyway. All right, guys. So hope you watch this before the class tomorrow.